I think this is one occasion, it's the first occasion in my life when I think I properly ought to start this by saying my lords, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is Peter Reynolds. I was elected the leader of cannabis law reform back in February of this year. We are a UK political party. We're not in the business of winning seats, we're in the business of winning influence. It wouldn't be right for them to go for seats because we are a single issue party. That's not to say that we won't be standing in elections, because we will do. We'll stand in elections to oppose people who support prohibition. And we'll stand in elections, we'll work with parties who will agree with our policies to support them and actually put people on the ground to help them. The first thing I should do is say thank you very much to Paul Flynn for sponsoring this event. Thank you very much, Paul. It's the result of you and we're here. We're here to present to you study taxing the UK cannabis market. On the panel is myself, Matthew Ather, who is the director of the Independent Drug Monitoring Unit, the organisation, the research organisation that's put together the study. Paul Flynn, who, as you will know, is an MP for Newport West. It's a complete coincidence. I'm a Newport boy as well. I did leave over 50 years ago. Susan Blackmore, who's a psychologist, writer for The Guardian, for Psychology Today, and Jim Duffy, who's an ex-inspector from Strathclyde Police and now a representative of LEAP, that is Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. So, in your press pack, you will see, first of all, there's a press release setting out some of the key points of today's announcement. There's the actual report taxing the UK cannabis market, which has got all the data and statistics. There's a clear plan for the regulation of cannabis in Britain. Now this is a detailed document. We've done an awful lot of work on this internally. This has been done before in the sense that Transform gave it a go, but I think that when you have a look at this you realise that it's never been done in as much detail and with as much consideration. It is a discussion document, clearly. Then in addition to that you'll find there's three of our leaflets. First of all, Toke Pure. This is harm reduction. The government, the Home Office, people are overflowing with telling us that cannabis is harmful and how much damage it can do. But here's actually an effort to do something about harm reduction. It's a scientific fact. The most dangerous thing about cannabis is smoking it with tobacco. So we're trying to encourage people, if they're going to smoke cannabis, not to smoke it with tobacco. The general leaflet about clear with membership information. And then there's our medicinal cannabis leaflet, which features some short case studies on a number of people who use cannabis for medicinal purposes. In addition to that, I've also put in copies of my latest correspondence with Baroness Brown, the Drugs Minister, and David Cameron, which will illustrate the dreadful response that anybody gets on this subject. It's probably the very antithesis of democracy, the way the ministers deal with the drugs issue and the cannabis issue. You approach them about it in a reasonable, considered way, and you're simply rejected. So I just wanted to put that in there to illustrate. I'm not going to make this not a party political broadcast, but I do just want to set this in context. These are our aims and objectives. The overall one is to end the prohibition of cannabis. Our second and the most urgent objective is to permit the prescription of medicinal cannabis by doctors. And our third and the objective, which is really most focused on what we're here today for, is the system of regulation. But if you'll permit me, I do want to just say a couple of words about medicinal use, because this is what really fires me up. This is what puts passion in my belly, is the whole issue of medicinal use. Because the situation in this country is a bit like a Franz Kafka novel, or to use a more up-to-date analogy, perhaps like a Jason Bourne movie, because nothing is what it seems. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all misinformation, deception, untruths. You know, we're in a position where there are now hundreds, literally hundreds, of peer-reviewed scientific studies that demonstrate the value of cannabis in a wide range of conditions. And yet, on the other hand, we have a Home Office that is incapable of saying anything except there's no medicinal value in cannabis. We know now that the endocannabinoid system, which was only discovered in 1988, and so we have to recognise that most people in Parliament have probably never heard of it. Most GPs have never heard of it, because most GPs don't have time to read research. But the endocannabinoid system is fundamental to all aspects of life. The central nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the immune system, the gastrointestinal system, the reproductive system, these are all regulated by cannabinoids. And the only source of cannabinoids outside the body, extraordinarily, is the cannabis plant. There is one other source of cannabinoids outside the body, which I think illustrates the beneficial effects of cannabis. It comes from inside the body, and that is mother's milk. Mother's milk is absolutely packed with cannabinoids, with endocannabinoids, because they are so necessary to nurture and promote life. So we have a Prime Minister who, on the YouTube Al Jazeera program back in March, said that the medical authorities were free to determine whether or not cannabis could be used medicinally. But if you approach the Home Office and ask them about it, they'll say, no, we're not even prepared to review it. And they're not even prepared to review it. And the reason they're not prepared to review it is because the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs has not identified any medicinal benefits. Les Iverson, who I count as a friend, has written to me separately, saying quite categorically, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs is not constituted to advise on medicinal benefits. And yet this is the excuse that is being given. And the other thing that's important to remember is these people who are approaching them, apart from me, from on a political basis, hundreds of people who are approaching them, people in pain, suffering and disability. People, a lot of them who don't frankly have the energy or the aren't able to cope with pushing for what should be their right. We have a situation where in America, in California alone, a state with 35 million people, the medical marijuana market is reckoned to be worth $9.5 billion by the year 2015. We have a situation where the Home Office again is saying no medicinal value in cannabis, but they have granted a unique license to GW Pharmaceuticals, which in effect has given them what is almost certainly an unlawful monopoly. And at the same time, they're promoting misinformation that Sativex, their product, is not cannabis, does not get you high, does not provide the euphoria that people using cannabis recreation. If you look in the Sativex SPC, the summary of product characteristics, it says, commonly, euphoric mood. I put in 6 press complaints commissions complaints only last weekend, because there was a story saying exactly this about trials of Sativex in Manchester hospitals. Every single one came up with this nonsense, trying to promote the idea that cannabis is not, Sativex is not cannabis. So, moving on to the report itself. These are some of the key facts. There are something like 3 million regular users of cannabis in Britain. That's people who use it between daily and monthly. There are 300,000 growers. I think that's a staggering figure. And there are direct costs of something like £500 million associated with cannabis alone. The total cannabis market is worth about $6 billion, and this perhaps is the single most extraordinary thing about the whole situation. Our government, our present policy, just gifts this to organised crime. You know, I suppose politicians, governments says that prohibition provides some form of control, but prohibition provides no control at all. It certainly doesn't provide any control for children, any protection for children. You know, I was horrified when I came here back in June, I think it was, and watched Charles Walker make his speech about cannabis and psychosis in young people. And he came out with the outrageous statement that cocaine was less harmful for children than cannabis was. But there is no protection for children available at all at the moment. The only ID that a dealer asks for is a £20 note. The facts are, and I can substantiate this, I can discuss it with you, the health risks of cannabis are hundreds of times less than almost any other recreational, prescription-only or over-the-counter medicine you want to talk about. But we have huge problems with cannabis farms destroying neighbourhoods. I think it went for, I think the figures went from something like 400 in 2007 to something like 6,000 in 2009. Extraordinary. And this is all organised crime, often Vietnamese people. Vietnamese people, some of whom have been human trafficked in here, are forced to work as slaves. They end up going to jail for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. People behind it get away with it. The tax and regulate policy will provide some control. It will provide thousands of new jobs. It would mean that I'm not saying it would eliminate going to children, to people, vulnerable people, but it would make the situation much better than it is. And the most extraordinary thing of all, we'd be looking at, this is the best estimate, 6.7 billion per annum net gain to the UK Exchequer. Now that's in a range, the top of that range is 9.5 billion. Now as I understand it, 6 billion is, you know, all the cuts that everybody spends all their time talking about, the cuts, if you like, that have originated so far, they amount to about 6 billion. I heard Nick Clegg on the radio as I was coming in today, saying, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could wave a magic wand and find a pot of gold? Well, here it is. I'm going to hand over to Matthew now, who will talk to you a little bit about the methodology used in preparing the report. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matthew Arthur. I'm Director of the Independent Drug Monitoring Unit. We're a small independent research consultancy specialising in the study of the UK drugs market, drug consumption, and a wide range of issues relating to illegal drugs. We fund ourselves by providing legal casework, expert witness services for the courts. We do not receive any official funding from any vested interests or whatever. We were commissioned by this report, a commercial commission by Clear. We provided a report to the best of our ability. Put simply, there are the current methods that are used by the government for establishing prevalence of cannabis use is the British Crime Survey. And this is where researchers go along with a clipboard to people's houses and ask them a number of questions about crime, including drugs. They say that it's confidential, but you know, if you are approached by somebody who's employed by the Home Office coming to your front door, would you actually tell the truth to them about an illegal activity that you engage in? And my answer is probably not. And certainly figures where they've actually looked at people who are actually being drug tested find about 40% don't actually disclose drug use even when they know they're going to be tested. So we regard that as very much the baseline, and what we instead looked at is the proportion of people who have actually been arrested for cannabis use within our surveys. We conduct large-scale surveys of drug use, and we have been doing so since, I've personally been doing so since the mid-1980s, but as an organisation we've been doing so annually since 1997. And one of the questions we ask is, you know, if they've been arrested for cannabis use, and if so, how many times, how long have they been using cannabis, how often do they use cannabis, how much do they use, how much do they pay for it, a whole wide range of questions. And we've had, over the years, now nearly 30,000 respondents involved since 1994. From that, we established that regular users are those most likely to be arrested, much more likely than casual users. And from the proportion of those arrested and the total number of arrests for cannabis from official statistics, we're able to extrapolate year on year the number of people we estimate who are actually occasional casual users and regular users of the drug, which are all found in the report. So we estimate that it's somewhere between about 1.7 and 4 billion. Get back to the figures. Yeah, between about 1.7 and 3.6 million regular users of cannabis, with an average of about 2.7 million. Using an average of about 10 grams a week, can go up to around about half an ounce a day in the very heaviest users, but although the majority of users use less than that, around the sort of gram a day mark would be typical. And from that we estimate the total size of the cannabis market is around about 1,000, on average about 1,000 metric tonnes a year. We also able to break down that market by the type of cannabis people use, and our figures very closely mirror the actual seizure statistics. Excuse me, I'm going to get myself some more. We also look at attitudes to cannabis use and use of all drugs to cannabis. And we found that when declassification down to Class C was being talked about, the actual user ratings of cannabis went down and went down to record levels. But when it was going back to Class B, the user ratings went back up again. So it looks like when the fruit is, should we say, slightly less forbidden, it loses much of its sweetness. And it very much illustrates the point that prohibition doesn't actually deter use. It may even stimulate it, act as an incentive for people to do something that's naughty. And so the assumption that's widely given that legalising cannabis or any other drug is likely to increase levels of usage among the population as a whole is quite obviously flawed. Even the British Crime Survey found a reduction in the people who claimed to use cannabis during the periods when it was down to class C. So when we actually look at the potential for a raising excise duty, there are two ways of doing it. It's either a flat rate, or there's actually basing it on the THC content, rather like it's the way that alcohol is done. With alcohol, the inspectors will test each batch of alcohol, specific gravity when they're actually brewing beer, etc. And duty is actually levelled on the actual alcohol content of the drink. Therefore, what we're suggesting is that cannabis should be taxed on the basis of £1 per gram per 5% THC, which would add about £3 a gram to the cost of an average deal of skunk. However, bear in mind that, of course, a lot of the current price is due to the fact that it's illegal and there is the risk factor, the danger money, and so the actual production costs are very, very much lower than this. And so even absorbing the tax, I wouldn't expect the actual levels of price levels to go up significantly. Possibly with some of the cheaper types of cannabis it might go up slightly at the wholesale level, but people would still be able to make a profit without fear of prosecution, provided of course they're paying their tax. So we estimate that the total potential revenue from taxing cannabis would be between around about £2.5 and £6.5 billion a year, with an average of about 4.9 billion, based on figures from each year since 2004. Now, on top of that, you have to add VAT, potential income tax from increased economic activity, and also the fact that people with a cannabis record are denied certain occupations and their earning power, earning capacity, on average is about £1,000 less than somebody with a clean record. And so we estimate that there's going to be significant increases in income tax revenue, etc. With production of cannabis, as has been suggested, there's somewhere between 150,000 and 500,000 people in Britain that grow cannabis, ranging from somebody growing a single plant in the window under natural light to large-scale facilities in industrial or agricultural premises where there are, in some cases, hundreds of lights and many thousands of plants. However, for personal use, you have to look at how long it takes to grow a crop, how much is produced, and how much somebody actually uses. And we estimate that rather than basing any sort of personal limits on a number of plants, it should be based on some more objective measures such as the actual surface area under cultivation, or the lighting available, the artificial lighting, so that somebody that's growing 2 square metres of flowering plants could expect to gain around about ½ kilo, which over a period of 14 weeks is around about, works out at around about an ounce a week, which is enough for reasonably heavy consumption, all but the heaviest users to be able to cope with an allowance of that nature. And of course, where it involves commercial level production, it involves the creation of an inspectorate to actually oversee a commercial level production, the level essentially ensure people are compliant with regulations, make certain that cannabis is not being diverted to an untaxed market, and to take charge of the analysis of batches of cannabis and the issuing of tax stamps, which would then show that essentially the cannabis that somebody buys has actually been legitimately taxed rather than diverted from the black market. So when you take everything into account, if you actually want to look at table 24 of the report, sorry, it's table 24, it's table 25 of the report, we estimate that total revenues, including licensing income, excise duty, VAT and income tax revenues, will vary between about £3.5 and £9 billion, with an average of 6.4. The current costs of prohibition, for want of a better word, between 300 and 600 million, with an average around 500 million. But there would be new costs involved. There would be costs involved in establishing an inspectorate. I wouldn't expect to see, for instance, savings in customs and excise, because there would still be intercepting illicit shipments and ensuring that any shipments, legitimate shipments, were properly dealt with. But we'd expect new costs to be around about £210 million or thereabouts, giving it a net gain of about £6.7 billion to the UK economy on an annual basis.
Thank you very much, Simon. Moving on, Paul.
Okay, thanks. I'm optimistic that this report by the Independent Drug Monitoring Unit might break new ground, because it speaks the language of politicians, it speaks the language of money, which they can see. £6 billion, these are great attractions to politicians when the path has been followed by politicians in this country and many others for 40 years has been one that's based on policies that are evidence-free and prejudice-rich. Almost everything that every government has said and forecast on drug policies has been wrong during those 40 years. And it was pointed out when there was the reclassification of cannabis, in spite of all the hysterical forecasts that violence is going to lead to the collapse of society, I mean, it went down. And when they reclassified it the other way, consumption went up. You're exactly wrong. I mean, I remember some golden moments over the years of Tony Newton and George Howard. Tony Newton speaking to the government, George Howard speaking to the opposition. We had a Friday debate about drugs once a year. And during the debate, both of them had to leave the chamber at some point because they needed a fix, because they were both chain smokers. And what they went on preaching about the horrors of young people using drugs, and they were hoofing it off to the bar, to have a quick cigarette, a drop of whiskey, possibly a couple of paracetamol for the headache they were going to get next morning. And the whole history, I'm afraid, has been based on an irrational, cowardly approach by politicians. I doubt this article written by a young backbencher in his first year in Parliament. He writes with pride about the fact that this was my maiden appearance on yesterday. Actually quoted him in yesterday in Parliament. And what he quoted him as saying that he'd managed to prompt a medical expert into summing up the dangers of ecstasy by revealing it was not the drug that killed you, but the dancing. And he goes on to then give an account of what he learned on that committee, how useful the committee was, and he gives a very persuasive account of the problems with the drugs law. And he makes fun of drugs policy has been no-go area for most politicians, with a few notable exceptions over the years. Taken a tough line, calling for a war on drugs and stiffer penalty has been the stocking trade politicians of both major parties. And you've got to point out that it hasn't worked. This was in that year 2002, written by a young backbencher named David Cameron. I just wonder, what this Prime Minister we have now thinks about what that backbencher said those years ago. Because he's one of the first Prime Ministers who does understand the position, things does understand, and he played a very impressive role on that select committee. I remember him cross-examining the father, called Fulton Glisby, whose son had died because he'd injected himself with talcum powder, which he thought was heroin. And the policeman was a very, what we ought to do with drug users is to lock them through the key. And he changed entirely, became someone who was campaigning for a sensible policy on drugs. Peter mentioned here, I mean, one of the awful things on this is the deep ignorance. I mean, Charles Walker is otherwise as sensible as a member of the committee. I'm talking was barking nonsense about cannabis. I recall Nigel Evans, who's a deputy speaker now, making a pronouncement in the debate tabloids saying, how on earth can anyone encourage someone to use cannabis? Do you realise it's made up of 70 chemicals? I didn't have anyone drew to one side and told him how many chemicals were in the cabbage that we had in the canteen the night before. But it is an area of bad science. And the result is this colossal waste of revenue that could be brought in, the stigmatizing of a drug that's on a par with, safer than many, less addictive than many drugs that are widely available, freely available, but the myths persist. And there must be some way, I believe, of getting a breakthrough. And I believe it will come through with the position on those who use cannabis as a medicine. And the evidence is overwhelming. And we have had groups here in the past, particularly ones suffering from multiple sclerosis, who say, seriously, this does work for me. It's anything that does work to the spasm and the pain. And this is the way that there has been progress in other countries. So I don't want to go on too long. There are Tom Breakers here. There are politicians in this House, and particularly the new ones. I mean, there's some progress being made by Caroline Lucas, who's actually not just one politician, she's actually got 9 politicians, because she's omnipresent. She is everywhere, in all groups. We co-chair Afghanistan withdrawal group, but everywhere I look, Caroline Lucas is there, and she's managed, by far the most successful of any one politician party that there's been in the last 40 years in this House. But she has, with the leadership in Brighton, made progress there with sensible policies. And there are groups of people from all parties who realise that our drug policies are unmanned, they're wasteful, and they affect people's lives and keep them from a medicine of their choice. And the only alternative is to encourage, as one does, I'm sure we're breaking the law when we do this, to encourage people to use them illegally, if there's a possibility of being apprehended. This was a real possibility, I know, 12, 15 years ago. I remember lots of two cases coming along, people who were genuinely in pain and were using cannabis who went to jail. But I don't believe we're in a position where any jury would convict on that. Judges would say, well, Parliament regulates the law, you must change the law. But I believe that the feeling outside, in the community generally, is they want to see this reform take place. We want to have a position that's rational. And I believe this report we have will be a great weapon in our hands to convince people that that is the way forward. It's sensible, and it will solve many of the problems we've had for years. It's a question of courage and people like Peter, people like yourselves, making sure you get to your MPs and convincing them that this is the same way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you for standing up.
Hello. Human nature. Sometimes I despair. All around us there's poverty, bad parenting, gangs, war, cruelty, crime. Well, I'm not a political person, so I don't get involved in the politics of any of these things and try to change them in any political way. So why am I here? Because this is the one thing that actually makes me want to bother to get on a train to London and come and talk about it. I think if there's anything that we could do to change our society in this country and also in the wider world for the better, it would be reforming our drug laws. Now, I'm speaking to the converted here, but anyway, never mind. Let's encourage each other in this way. It seems to me that prohibition is like a kind of a drag on all of us. A kind of, like, I imagine, kind of Dick Whittington with a little bundle full of lead, or sort of, you know, and it's on all of us. Not all of us smoke cannabis, although an awful lot of us do. But all of us are affected. I used to live in Bristol, and I now live in a peaceful little village in Devon. We were broken into again and again and again. And none of the perpetrators was ever caught, and all the police would say, they'd come round dutifully and take statements, and all they would ever say is they're just kids trying to get money for drugs. and the wreckage that ensued. And I realise how much less fearful I am now, not living in a place where this happens all the time, but most of us in this country live in cities and are constantly, it's a little bit in the back of your mind. Of course there'll be crime, without illegal drugs, but everything that we're hearing here suggests that it would be a great deal less. A couple of things that haven't been mentioned today are some sort of purely personal issues, but the freedom issue is not something we can pin down in reports like this. But honestly, if I go and grow some nice dope at home and smoke it myself, and my children won't have any because they say, oh, they're not end up drunk like you. I am not harming myself. Well, if I am harming myself, it's my problem. It's not very serious, and I don't think it's going to cost the NHS so much, and I'm certainly not harming anybody else. But that's, as I said, is a pure opinion issue, and one of the things I really like about this report and what's happening here today, and why I'm going to go out and publicise it as much as I can, is because it's not about those kind of opinion issues, it's about facts, gathering information, and that's about it. In a way, this is even more depressing because we know our government will sack somebody for saying, let's base our policy on science. But I have to remain, as a lifelong scientist, I have to remain optimistic that in the end scientific truths will prevail over idiocy and bigotry and ignorance. Another point that hasn't been mentioned by anyone else is the pure class and racial unfairness of prohibition. Because I honestly think that, for me as a 60-year-old white, well-to-do, educated mother living in a small village in Devon, if I grow cannabis in my garden, my chances of being busted are quite small. If I were young and poor and black and living in Bristol, for example, or any city, my chances of not being busted would be very small. And that really makes me angry. I mean, lucky me, but it makes me angry. So there are many, many things here to add apart from this. So, can we be optimistic at all that anything's going to change? Because we've had how long? 40 years of the Misuse of Drugs Act. We've had every kind of human kind of stupidity, ignorance and refusal to accept the facts. Here we're presented with the most fantastic schemes that could really work, and we know that, well, we fear that nobody's going to listen. Will it change? Well, I think there were two things that politicians will want. One is money, and the other is votes. Here we have promises of the magic money. What did you call it?
Pot of gold.
The pot of gold, the magic pot of gold out of nowhere, yes. Will they listen? Well, I don't think they'll listen until they've got the other thing, which is the votes. And here, my optimism comes from my thought that there will be a tipping point. I think it's that kind of a phenomenon. It's not one of those slow, it's one of those things. If any politician standing for election thinks that by and large the people voting for him are of the just say no type, and they, ooh, drugs are dangerous, so we must prohibit them, then he or she will go that line. What it requires is there are enough of us ordinary people who are going to vote to make our politicians think, I might get more votes. And even, can you imagine this? Can you imagine, let's say next year, let's say, or whenever the next election is, in a few years' time, the politicians, the candidates clamouring to be the one loudest saying, I'm going to be the one at last to sort out the cannabis problem, we'll get more money, and you can have bigger pensions, and they'll be clamouring to, can you think that's going to happen? Well, I see some shaking heads, but it'll happen one day. It's got to happen one day. This horrendous burden, this great weight that we're all carrying around, it just becomes heavier and heavier. At some point we're going to have to throw it off. But maybe it'll be sooner than later. So all I can say is I urge all of you, just get the word out, keep talking. There's nothing very dramatic we can do, but if every friend we tell other people, and we can actually change the number of people who will vote for someone who will get this done, that's the best I can think of. That's how I managed to go to sleep at night, not too depressed and a little bit hopeful. Thank you.
And to Jim Duffy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Jim Duffy speaking on behalf of LEAP, an organisation that probably quite a few people out there have never heard of. Who are we? Very briefly, LEAP stands for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. We're made up of officers, police officers, drug enforcement officers, district attorneys, senators, serving officers throughout the United States of America and starting to get a grip here in the UK as well. We understand that we've been fighting a drugs war for 40 years since 1970. We fought it in America, we fought it in the UK, and that war is lost. That war is completely lost and completely unwinnable. How unwinnable is it? Well, since 1970, the United States of America has locked up many of its citizens for non-violent drug offences. Between 1971 and 2007, it put 39 million people in jail. 39, the biggest growth industry in the United States of America at the moment, is built in prisons. What we did when we prohibited drugs was we effectively surrendered it. We surrendered the control of the drug market to the bad guys who run it. They are the people who decide what drugs they're going to sell, who they're going to sell it to, what the purity, the strength, what they're going to cut it with. They are the people who decide if they're going to sell it to 10-year-olds, or your kids, or your grandkids, or if they're going to give it away and get people hooked. And what we've done for 40 years of prohibition is to turn our backs on that and just say to people, no. And that hasn't worked. And Albert Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We have done that. I was a police officer for 32 years. I never remember a time when we didn't have zero tolerance. I never remember a time when we didn't ask for more powers and get them. I never remember a time when we made the slightest bit of difference. When I joined the police in 1975, we talked about a tenner bag. When I left in 2007, we were still talking about a tenner bag. Had inflation kept pace, it would have been £147. It wasn't. There are only two questions in the drugs war. They get harder to get and they get more expensive. Everyone in this room, every drugs worker, every social worker, every police officer will tell you drugs have never been plentiful and they have never been cheaper. So if you wanted to continue in that vein, sit on your seats and do nothing. But if you are like me and like the people on the panel here feel that we need to take control of this situation back, then we have to do something different. And that different thing is what's talked about here. Take control of it. Legalise it, regulate it, and tax it. Make it work for us. Take it away from the criminals. The minute you take it away from the criminals, people say to me, well, if you stop them getting money from that, they'd only go and do something else. Great. I'm all in favour of having to work for the money, because they're not having to work for it just now. There's about a £7 billion market, black market drugs in this country, and we're doing nothing about it except say no. So if you're quite happy to continue with that, then sit down. But if you're not, you need to look at the alternatives. This report here, as other speakers have said, I'm very impressed with the content, and I think it will be very hard for the government to rubbish it, because it's their figures that help to produce the report that's there. And it's obvious as a nose in your face that what we're doing isn't working, and this is an alternative. Yes, let's take it forward, let's legalise it, let's control it. People have said, okay, we legalise and control alcohol, tobacco, gambling. People die from all those things. But at the moment we have a drugs market where we have no control at all. Not a bit. There is a government report hidden away in the depths of Downing Street which said about 4 or 5 years ago, in order to make a difference in the drugs market, you need to stop 80% of the stuff that comes into the country. Best estimates in that report were able to currently stop 5%. That report was never publicised. It was buried away. It took 6 freedom of information requests to get it out. What we're doing is not working. How can people not understand that? How can people not grasp the nettle and say we need to do something different? Here's something different for us. Here's something that works. It's already done in California, the United States of America, where people can get personal licenses and grow their own, pay tax on it. In Portugal, they've decriminalised the possession of stuff for personal use, And rightly enough, as we said, we've got the horror stories. Portugal will become the drugs tourist capital of Europe. They legalised, well, they didn't legalise, but they started to give heroin addicts heroin in Switzerland 8 years ago. Has it been a drugs overdose death from heroin in Switzerland in that 8 years? Because it's controlled, it's regulated, people know what they're buying, and if you pardon the phrase, it does exactly what it says on the tin. So you know what you're getting and what the effect will be. And if people make the choice that they want to take cannabis or anything else at all, then as long as they've been informed, you know what it's about, let them go and do it. 30 years in the police, and I had far more trouble with people who took drink than I ever had with people who took drugs. Arresting people who took drugs was a joy because they came along quite happily. Drunks just wanted to fight me, and I never really enjoyed that. But we need to change it, folks. This is a great first step. Leach fear and things is slightly different than that we would regulate and legalise everything. But we have to start somewhere. This is a great place to start. And if you want to be part of that, then let's go and talk about it to people. Let's get them convinced of the strength of our argument. Because once you do that, it doesn't take long to get people on your side. And from the ground level up, once politicians hear it from the bottom up, and they realise, as has already been said, there's votes in it, and there's money in it, then things will change. But you need to help that change take place. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much to all my colleagues on the panel. Any questions?
Yes, so I came in a little bit late. At this point, you brought up that, in fact, prohibition is a stepping stone for people that just want cannabis. Due to prohibition, you go to your drug dealer, and you're often not just offered pot, but they might be ecstasy or cocaine or whatever, yeah? So there are 2 or 3 million people that are potentially being offered other drugs, whereas if they go to a coffee shop or can grow for themselves, the other drugs are taken out of the loop.
An excellent point, if they can do that.
I think it's a very serious point.
I mean, Jim might want to say something about that.
I also often get asked when I talk about this around the country about, you know, if people start with cannabis, if you decriminalise it and regulate it, then try it and go on to bigger and better things. Do you take a drink?
I used to be an alcoholic, but I'm 10 years clean.
Good for you. I enjoy a drink, I enjoy a beer. I also buy my particular poison from 2 guys in Scotland called White and Mackay. Massive that size. But there's a vodka from Russia which is 138% proof. Okay, high, like that. Do I want to drink that? No, I don't. I like to take my time to get to my high. So just because drugs would become regulated and legalised doesn't mean everyone's going to dive into the deep end. People like what they like. It's not a gateway drug, it's a choice thing. The thing about regulating and controlling it is that we're not advocating it becomes compulsory. We're not advocating that everyone should try it. We're not advocating that it should be sold to children. It would be the same as alcohol and the same as tobacco, 18 and regulated outlets. Okay, it wouldn't work all the time, but if it works 80% of the time, it's 80% more than it's working just now.
Thank you. Other question, please?
Can I ask a question? Others on the panel. In the report you talk about measuring levels of THC and so on in the drug. Now there is some evidence that it's the ratio of THC to cannabidiol which is important, and that seems to me very important because trying these different drugs the feel is totally different and so on. But and it looks as though the illegal market has encouraged the production of high THC and low cannabidiol, which is much more harmful. That's got quite complicated though. Are you proposing that we should test the levels as well, or would there be any way of ensuring that we had something with neuroprotectors in it as well as the THC?
I did actually give this some thought when I was writing the report. I thought if we're starting to get to that, it's going to make it much too complicated
Messy, yeah.
for people to actually understand. Though the idea of being able to offset the THC content by CBD content might be something that would be worth looking at. I'm here to actually put figures on things rather than that. But certainly encouraging use of much higher CBD forms of the drug would be definitely beneficial from a public health point of view.
But shouldn't you tax it less if there's more CBD in it?
Well, that
tax more if the accelerator's down, tax less if the brake's down, isn't it?
Well, that was one of the options I was thinking of when I was doing that. But being able to sort of quantify that, that's going to mean that you have to do that's going to increase the analysis costs essentially, because you're going to have to run two separate analyses on the same sample. It doesn't automatically, it's not something you can necessarily run, it depends on the methods used. It's not something you can necessarily do straightforwardly, but certainly to encourage, to have an incentive for higher CBD within the taxing regime would be something that would be worth looking at.
Because from a medicinal point of view, you really want to know what CBD you've got in there. You want to know as much of the chemical content as possible, really.
Yeah.
Not just the CBD, what's up there.
I think it's worth, there's a company I've only become aware of recently, a Dutch company called Echo Pharmaceuticals, who work in partnership with Bedrocan, who many of you will know are the Dutch government's official producer of medicinal cannabis. And Echo Pharmaceuticals is developing a business based on extracting phytocannabinoids, that's the cannabinoids from the plants. And it can give you basically whatever you want. It can give you THCV or CBC or all those other acronyms. And so what is possible to do nowadays is quite extraordinary. I think one other point I'd just like to make to anybody who doesn't know about it is that we are currently trying to organise about 30 medicinal users to actually challenge the Home Office in the courts. We've asked them to go out and actually get as supportive correspondence as they can get from their doctors. And we have then identified 3 doctors, one from Germany, one from Luxembourg and one from Holland, who are prepared to see these people and actually consider giving them a prescription for Bedrocan medicinal cannabis. Bedrocan comes in 4 different varieties, it says that in the clear plan. The idea then is that they would apply to the Home Office for an import licence. No doubt that application would be refused, but that then opens the possibility of us actually taking the government to judicial review over this decision. And I think that is one of the most hopeful routes that there is. And my optimism or my pessimism sort of goes up and down, but I do feel that this is a way we can actually force the government's hand. I mean, I have a theory that there's an individual in the Home Office, a civil servant who's been in the Home Office for an awful long time, who is really behind this, who tells the ministers and the Home Office ministers as they get in there, no, you can't do that. I have a theory that there's just 1 or 2 individuals in the Home Office who are really the blocker to the obstruction. Any other questions?
Well, actually, I just want to say something about the CBD THC. If one had a regulated market, government licensed producers could produce cannabis with certain CBD that would be labelled, so that then people who know that they want high CBD and low THC can go for those brands.
Absolutely.
And at the moment we're just about to launch in California a questionnaire to one of the big distributors who has 40,000 patients, and we're testing the CBD, and it's going to be on what patients find has the greatest efficacy for what illness.
Right.
So one will get a database of THC, CBD, and what people find works best with what.
Fascinating.
Part of the suggestions that we had in our report for essentially would involve the issuing of tax stamps for the batches of cannabis that have been tested by official labs with the inspectors, etc. And the idea would be that those tax stamps would contain the dates of the data analysis and the levels of THC, etc., and the tax that's actually paid. So you basically get 1 stamp per gram, which could be sort of 35p for something very low, or it could be sort of £4 for something very high. But it would be, but with that would be an indication, at the very least, of THC content, and really it should have CBD there as well, if the analysis. That would obviously, increase the analysis cost, but probably not significant.
Phil?
Yeah, again, I'll address the THC, CBD, CBN conundrum. CBD is in fact a precursor chemical in marijuana. Through maturity, it's converted to THC and will degrade to CBN through the currently going to have a meeting with the BBC trustees over the programme called How Drugs Worked, where it was claimed that the genes in skunk have been turned up to produce THC and consequently turned down on the CBD, which is complete fallacy. The reason the THC is so high is because the plant hasn't been fertilised. So it has lived long. The moment the plant is fertilised, the plant itself is effectively dying. All its energies are transferred into seed production, and the THC levels do not get very high. That's the difference between old school weed and new school weed. The plants which are being claimed for use in sativaks are the genetics obtained from Portafarm Netherlands. Our government claimed that Portafarm had a licence when they gave £10 million to GW Pharmaceuticals to buy these seeds. Portafarm's licence had been revoked by the Dutch government when they found out they actually had one. French, they got in touch with the Dutch government wanting to get in touch with Portafarm because they had an R&D licence. The Dutch government went, where did they get that? An investigation showed that nobody in any department or any department could put their hands up to giving Portafarm a licence for R&D. These people provided virtually all the cannabis seeds for over 30 years to the entire Dutch cannabis seed market, illegally. And we gave them £10 million. I put a freedom of information request in nearly a year ago on this. I got a letter back from Baroness Browning about a month and a half before, so, which was in fact a reply to the letter supporting Peter's request for a meeting with the Prime Minister. It was 5 months to get that reply. Nobody, as yet, has answered that question. I've had a supposed answer to the Freedom of Information request. The first one mysteriously disappeared. Nobody knows where it went. I have not had any answers from Judge Bowdenshaw on the subject. I've not had any answers from Baroness Browning on the subject. All I have had is yet another arrest. In 40 years of cannabis prohibition, basically my family have been raided virtually since 1972. My own daughter is now 20. She's been through 6 cannabis raids in my house. I produce cannabis seeds. Commercially, I pay VAT on my seeds. I produce them completely legally. Yet the government will take my VAT and then drag me through court. But the issue about CBD is one of the really most misunderstood things, and the information coming out over sativaks is deliberately misleading. The thing about needing 2 plants and about which plants. Well, Watson, the man who started Portafarm, with his partner R.C. Clark, I believe R.C. Clark is the author of Marijuana Botany, who agreed to grow distinctive cannabis plants. Watson is the man who brought the first skunk plant over from California. Plants specifically designed for growing indoors, not for high THC or high anything else, but for growing indoors in artificial environments. Short, stocky, hyperactive. These 2 people are the granddaddies of the entire indoor cannabis growing market, and we gave them $2 million. Nobody will tell me why. Nobody will admit who knew about it, but I'm pretty sure that Jeffrey Guy and Tony Blair knew exactly the situation with their seeds not being licensed. Because at the point of taking away Portafarm's licence, the entire seed production of the Netherlands came to a halt. They started relocating to Switzerland and other parts of it. Now, my big question is, how can we justify that? While we still prosecute people such as me, who are no different from Watson or R.C. Clark.
What is there we can do to call some of these political shenanigans to account?
I'd say one hopeful side is in Europe. I remember
the Council of Europe, and we've got, I chair the Health Committee, and we have a document, it's a convention, and it's been going through the Council of Europe and to the Council of Ministers and to various other groups for 5 years now, 2005 and had the support of the International Red Cross and a couple of think tanks. Now, the trouble with changing things in the Council of Europe, it takes such time. It should become a convention this year, and it then has to be ratified by the 46 individual states. I mean, it's not going for legalization, but it's going for a shift from the criminal justice solutions to health solutions. So it's a major new look at it. As I was saying, that the answer is not there, based very much on what happened in Portugal. It was suggested, and in Portugal they changed the law. They went to depenalisation in 2001, and by 2005 they halved the number of drug deaths and cut almost all the other problems with costs and so on. All went down, but it's the most spectacular change that's taking place. So that, I mean, things are working in a slow way. I know another report I put about 12 years ago was the Council of Europe, which was bitterly opposed by the Scandinavians and others, and didn't get any. It was supported by the Swiss and other people. The Italians are very progressive. So there, I think internationally there's beginning to become a softening as the evidence builds up. So I'm not sure to say. I didn't think when I first came here 25 years ago as an advocate of decriminalisation and legalisation that we'd be in this position today. I would have thought progress would have been made. I also say the point that it's never been a problem to me as far as the electorate is concerned. I certainly might have lost people of my age, but I mean, my election result last time was the best of all my neighbours. If I suffered the swing against Labour that occurred in all my neighbouring seats, I wouldn't have been an MP anymore. And I believe that the public are happier to vote for someone who doesn't always toe the party line and is willing to stand up and say the unconventional than those who always take the cowardly approach to going along and not changing. I mean, I think one of the worst that we had here was in 2005 with the Drugs Act, which came in, was passed about 3 months before the general election. And there's a case for saying there should be any new laws 3 months before a general election, because even the normally timid MPs are overwhelmed with cowardice 3 months before the election. But part of that act was to reclassify magic mushrooms in the same classification as heroin, which is insanity. But there were only about 10 of us in the House that opposed this and said, this is crazy. If you put the two together, heroin has killed a lot of people, mainly because of prohibition. And magic mushrooms, which never really killed anybody. An irrational, hysterical case was made to put that on the book. So I think you have to fight them with the compassion. The case that gets through, the case that will quieten the House and make you listen to them, is the case for medicinal cannabis, and I think that's the way forward. But all the other arguments, the prejudice is too great, the fear is too great for them. They don't want to see a headline saying, politician, Lib Dems, wherever it might be, goes to pot.
I did send you with my correspondence with James Russell after your exchange in the House.
He's no intellectual giant, this new it's I want to put my head on the table and solve when you mention his name.
Yeah.
We all do.
He's not good.
Unfortunately, the medical situation at the moment is actually only being driven forward to monopolise and privatise.
Exactly.
Medical cannabis in this country. As I say, as a seed producer, I started my company after the Runson report. Even believing things were going to get better. GW Pharmaceuticals started around the same time. He's received £10 million. I've had at least £2 million to spend criminalising me, seizing my company's assets and destroying them. On the last occasion, I didn't even get a receipt. It's thousands of pounds worth of it and destroyed it, no receipt.
Any other questions?
Do you mind if you flash pictures?
Not at all. Cara.
Hi, I've just got a question about the last point in the press release which says expunging existing cannabis criminal records to approximately 1 million people will result in an additional income tax revenue of 200 million. Could you just explain why those records would be expunged and how that extra revenue would be generated?
Well, essentially that figure came from when we look at the annual incomes of people who have got clean records and people that don't. And the average, the differential is around about £1,000 a year, which, tax at 20 pence in a pound, that's where the figure comes from. The total number of people that have been, I think the millionth cannabis offence was around 1999, 2000, so we're probably up to about 2 million altogether. About 1.7 per person on average, so say about just over 1 million people over the years have had a cannabis criminal record. So that's where the figures come from essentially.
So you're not talking about removing people who already have criminal records, it's a projection forward of people who would not be subsequently convicted of...
If their existing records were expunged and people could then find that, careers that had been closed to them would reopen, if that happened, then I think those existing people who had existing records may find that their earning capacity increases. On the other hand, looking forward, it's people whose earning capacity would not be artificially reduced as a result of it.
I think there's one other, something to give optimistic view, but I think there's one chance. We haven't had a debate in this new Parliament on this, and except for the reefer madness of Charles Walker. But there is, a third of Parliament has changed. I just had a conversation, to give you some idea how Parliament's changed. Just when I was coming down, I had a phone call, and a Conservative MP said, "You're talking about blowjob gate, are you?" And this was, you can get this sort of conversation from many Conservative women MPs in the past when they raised this. It's a long story, which she was quoted as saying, that was the way of getting called by the Speaker. But, it's a younger generation of MPs who had a different experience than the third that left as well. So there must be something amongst people with the courage to take an intelligent decision. There's also the fact that this is the most independent group of MPs. There'd be more people voting against their party in this Parliament than any other for a generation. So there is a strong line of independence from all sides, and one hopes that the people who are, as they are a younger group, there might be a chance of getting something worthwhile in the books. But I'll make an undertaking that I'll get a debate on this, and we'll trawl through the MPs and see who's there. We know there are people who will make a stand, but let's find out how strong it is. And, but the case hasn't been made, I'm afraid, for a while now.
Could I just make a comment on the previous question? There is potentially a correlation cause confusion here in this issue, because it could be that the people, to put it really simply, it could be the people who get caught are stupid out and they never will earn more, or other social factors that make them different in the first place, that was the cause for A, them getting caught, and B, them earning less. So we can't necessarily believe that people will earn more. I buy your argument, it seems logical, but we need a little bit of caution for that reason.
Well, as I was saying, one of the other points on the sort of tax revenues generally is, of course, if as a result of taxation and regulation usage goes down, then so of course with the tax revenues. So,
I think I just say that Tom Brady pointed out, left a note saying he has to be on a statutory instrument, which Paul can know that.
Yes, what that means.
But it sounds very painful.
Tortured.
But he wanted to make the point, which I think most of us will probably know, that at the Lib Dem conference on Sunday, they are discussing a drugs motion that is seeking to shift emphasis from enforcement to healthcare, called for the Portuguese model to be investigated, as well as an alternative framework for a strictly controlled and regulated cannabis market.
I think they've got some very good new people. Julia is very good on the subject, and amongst the new MPs.
They keep saying they're going to do it, but they don't do it.
What?
The Lib Dems keep promising that they're going to do something about the drug problem. Before the last election, on their website, they were supporting,
reforms, but
I think at the
they
end
don't
of the
actually
day,
seem to actually debate it or to push it forward at all.
I think at the end of the day, it's not the politicians that need to be persuaded, it's the editor of the Daily Mail. And who needs an advisory council when you've got the editor of the Daily Mail to consult on drugs policy? And that, I think,
But they'll never change. I mean, they write for the curtain switches of suburbia.
Well, they do. I mean,
but on the other hand, if the curtain switches suburbia find their taxes might not go up or might go down, or their pensions might improve, if they, the economic argument is something that even the curtain switches of suburbia might take note of. That's rather more so than anything else.
That's why one of the principal things that we've adopted in the last 6 months is the Press Complaints Commission. Now, it certainly is toothless, and some of the decisions they've given have been absolutely unbelievable.
I've seen your website that you've actually put in.
That's right, but I mean, the point is now that every single time there is an inaccuracy about cannabis in the press, we make a complaint. And that puts the newspaper, requires the newspapers to jump through hoops. And, they'll get tired of that. It costs them money. They hired Willie Notcutt, one of the GW consultants. They hired Willie Notcutt to actually try and fight one of my last complaints. I mean, one of the most amusing ones, those of you who know Peter Hitchens, Peter Hitchens back in, I think in January, described cannabis as a sinister poison. This is one of the whole issue. I made the complaint. And it was rejected. He was just expressing his view, etc. And so I took it to the independent reviewer. And I said essentially, look, if Peter Hitchens wants to call it sinister, that's fair enough, because that's his opinion. But it's not a poison. And I laid out a whole list of it. Cannabis is less toxic than raw potatoes. I laid out a whole list. And eventually I got a response from the independent reviewer, Lieutenant General Sir Michael Wilcox, which said, Mr. Anthony, blah, 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 I'm happy that you've shown that cannabis is not a poison in the general sense. Mr. Hitchens was using it as a metaphor.
Those buckets are you.
Any other questions? No.
It was on the back of Mr. Flynn and Dr. Blackmore. All we really asked for was evidence and science-based policy, and it's been skewed off so much, and especially the ACMD, it's become a farce. I was just wondering, how can we actually get it back to being science and evidence?
Follow Sarah Graham on Twitter. She complains about bored all the time. I can't believe it. ACMD.
Well, while you think about it, I'm glad you asked the question, but I suppose you can tell already that if we had an answer, I think all of us would have given it. So you're just sort of confirming that.
Just making the point that it's just so skewed now, and obviously Professor Nutt is doing his best to try and get some kind of semblance back on track, but.
Professor Nutt was sacked because he was caught in possession of an intelligent idea. Legislation is normally based on bad science, and people are shocked to go to this wonderful democracy because we behave like rational human beings. They don't. This is politics.
Unfortunately, Professor Nutt makes mistakes. He's the person who said that the genes in cannabis have been turned up.
Everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
But he is in favour, okay, he can make a mistake, but he is in favour of look at the science, look at the evidence and use that. And if there's a mistake gets in, well, somebody will correct it. But I would just like to say, last night I was at one of a meeting of a new Plymouth Society, the Plymouth Skeptics in the Pub. And the skeptics in the pub are spreading quite wildly, like the Café Scientifique. There are philosophical pub meetings, and this in a small city like Plymouth, there's 3 different ones. Oh, and there's the humanists in the pub as well. Now, all of these groups, in some way, are people coming together because they want rationality, evidence, science based to whatever it is they're interested in, whether it's UFOs or assisted dying or whatever it is. But there are quite a lot of people, and they're all ages there, quite a lot of young people, but actually all ages were there. And coming out of the discussion there was an awful lot of things about, but what's the evidence, and how can we make the evidence count, and how can we make people see that evidence was about homeopathy and stuff last night. But So I'm sort of encouraged by a groundswell
There
of
is a
people who
groundswell.
do care.
I spoke to an organisation called Truth Juice, which sounds very similar to it. It's working in Birmingham, Wales. Sounds very similar.
Sounds a bit more tasty, but
Sorry, you had a...
Yeah, could not as judicial would you be forced on the grounds that the current law is not fit for purpose because it's not actually formulated on, you know, they say that they will incorporate the latest science into their drug policy. Well, they've obviously ignored it, haven't they?
Yeah.
So does that technically make the law a bunch of crap?
You're saying that like it's something new, you know. Going back to 1892, 1893, the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission essentially, recommended against criminalising cannabis in the first place. Come 1928, when that was probably the greatest piece of work that had been on cannabis, the British government, I think, actually abstained to their credit when cannabis was made illegal internationally. Yeah, it
was the Egyptians.
The Egyptians and the Turkish that were very much behind it. Going back to the Wootton Report, Advisory Council reports in the 70s and 80s, it's just all been totally ignored by the politicians. And at the end of the day, the politicians do what the politicians want to do, which is what the Daily Mail wants them to do. And, okay, I do think about the Mail because they are probably the worst of
But isn't the Mail, aren't the editors of the Mail just like the politicians in the sense that it's not votes, it's readers, but it's the same principle.
Yeah.
And therefore the same advice to all of us applies. Talk to people, get that message out there. If there ever comes a day when the editors will think they'll sell more copies by writing, let's regulate cannabis, think of all the tax we could get, then they'll do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to move away from the idea that we necessarily need to convince Labour that the editor of the Daily Mail. What can we do to show the politicians that actually a lot of the general public do support some reform of drug policy to move, like people do generally on the whole oppose the idea of criminalising people with drug problems or people who use drugs or people whose choice of medicine is cannabis. So I don't know if you the politicians maybe would have any suggestions for that.
I mean, it's a honorary of campaigning, going along, seeing your own MP, insist on seeing or face-to-face, and make sure you're an answer. They work through. I mean, there's some very skilled lobbying groups now, particularly the level 38. Very good on saving the forest. Very clever with getting messages, individual messages from constituents to MPs. They have to answer preferably handwritten or more often email these days. Is to work on them. But the other one is to pull the right levers. There must be a limit to this, as you say. I've been along listening to the irrational arguments and seeing in the game here because of the fear that politicians have in this way. I'm hopeful that I've just finished a book which I wrote about how to be an MP. Published it 40 years ago, but just rewriting it now. The world has changed. There's more power for the legislature now, even with Berkeley as speaker, than there has been before. The backbenchers much more powerful in gaining time here. We're in the post-expenses, and in the first book I had 10 commandments. In this book I've got 30 commandments, which we have to win back trust, and politicians are, the morale is low as it can be, and they're not going to win back trust by doing anything we did before. But people who make a stand and have a strong individual case and will make and show some courage are likely to survive more than the others. I mean, the post-right reform, again, a huge change is taking place here. I think, we can always do more. There's so many issues around, but I think we have to contest it in the US and find some champions for ending prohibition. But they're there, I'm sure, in the new party, in this new form.
My MP is a creationist.
Oh.
Some hope I've got on this issue.
There are some strange people.
My MP's a slave driver. Or his family was,
Well, that's a bit different. I mean, this guy, honestly, I have been emailing him back on physical letters with House of Parliament, lovely cream paper with a thing on top, and he says, well, God created us, and of course that is just as good a theory as Darwin's theory, which is only a theory.
I would advise anybody to actually go and see your MC rather than simply write to
Yep,
them.
I'm
If
looking
you
at it
write
right
to them,
now,
what you
mate.
get back is boilerplate replies from Home Office standard.
If you get it.
Sorry.
I'm one of thousands of people who have multiple sclerosis. I was at a conference in March this year here in Westminster around the corner, and the leading professor, consultant and researcher with huge backing from Big Pharma said openly in answer to my question that cannabis is a neuron protector. It is the only thing that can save my life. I would request, if there is any backing in this room, that we take the government to court for killing us, because that's what they do.
Prohibition of cannabis is genocide. Tell teachers, you go and tell all teenagers that. But what I've been doing is whenever you see teachers with their little duckling, with their little rows of children, what are they called? School children, you just stroll up alongside the teacher and say, you've got to start telling those kids the truth about cannabis before we do. And that's all you've got to say. You can take it further, that's all you've got to say. You know, it's like by the time they get home, you make sure you know the truth, because they're going to bring it to you, because we're going to bring it to them. You know, we're going to tell the grannies and the teenagers, and then you've lost it.
By saying that it's genocide, I think that you're spoiling your own case, because that's not right. It may be murder, you're depriving people of their life, you're harming people like the lady at the back there. Genocide is something else altogether.
No, I'm very, very serious about this. If you want to have a proper medical debate, because the gentleman was saying, how can we reclaim a valid scientific debate here, which has gone out of the window years ago, this is the way to do it. If you actually take the government to court, if somebody is willing to give you the backing, I'm willing to be that person, then we can actually start having a scientific debate about it in the press as well, and that's what we need to do. It's pure science.
I think the legal issue, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but the legal, I've discussed this with lawyers, the legal issue is that those sort of things are possible, but I mean, essentially it's incredibly complex. What the lawyer in particular I'm thinking of, what he wants is what they call a straw man. That's somebody with no assets. Okay, thank you.
And I also have a 15-year-old daughter, so I have every interest in staying alive.
The other point I wanted to make, which generally is not understood, it's in one of our leaflets, people have argued with us about it in the past, is that there is evidence to show that cannabis I can't remember the chemical name, but cannabis promotes the production of a chemical compound that is directly implicated in the repairing of the myelin sheath. Therefore, cannabis actually does offer potential for reversing multiple sclerosis.
And it is also cost effective.
Absolutely.
Because there are thousands of us which are costing the taxpayer millions of pounds a year on completely useless medicines. And I stopped taking that because I couldn't hold it on my conscience anymore. I was costing the taxpayer more than £16,000 a year. And I knew it wasn't doing me any good.
Jason?
For Mr. Duffy, I was just wondering what experience you had actually trying to stem the flow of supply and imports. Just what is the success rate, if you can term it such a thing?
Well, personally, in the 32 years I was in the police service, I spent 22 years of that in the traffic department. If I booked you for speeding, I'm sorry, you deserve it, I'm not out about that at all. It was me, yes, just after I booked you. How did we get involved in it? Usually we were involved through intelligence-led policing, where we were given a target car and we stopped. Once you stopped that, the drug squad appeared out of the bushes and took the credit. From that point, from the point of view of how we actually make an impact, every policeman tries to do something, because there's a certain amount of kudos in the service and they're able to get some kind of drug cases against your name. But as I was talking about earlier on, over the 32 years, it doesn't make a little bit of difference. Drugs have never been more plentiful, they've never been cheaper. And unfortunately, where I come from in the west of Scotland, there is an inexhaustible supply of young men who for £500 will drive a car at others, will sit in the car while somebody puts something in the boot and drive it back up the road. what we catch.
I remember when we went into Afghanistan, first of all, and Tony Blair, there was a big argument that this is intolerable, that 90% of the heroin used on the streets comes from Afghanistan. So 10 years later, we lost 380 of our soldiers, countless numbers of others. And the situation is that 90% of our heroin comes from Afghanistan. The only difference is that it's cheaper.
But not only that, the actual amount of heroin that Afghanistan is producing has also increased, so they're actually supplying the rest of the world a lot more of their heroin.
Actually, the Taliban were the only...
believe that the Golden Triangle has just completely gone out of business. I'm sorry, I can't accept
Didn't Britain start that?
that we went into Afghanistan, that suddenly I'm being able to buy Afghani hash on the street here. Our streets are overflowing with heroin. We're supposed to have that place locked down. How come it's all ending up here?
I mean, nothing.
Yeah, and nothing's coming from the Golden Triangle. We don't even talk about the Golden Triangle. That's Cambodia.
Well, as I was about to say, the Taliban actually, when they were in power in Afghanistan, reduced the acreage of opium poppy cultivation down to, you know, a fraction of what it was before and what it is now.
1% of what it is now.
You know, the only reason why things have continued to flow, we say, was we suspect a lot of people have been, the big traffickers have been stockpiling it and sort of let it come through. But certainly once we went in, then those restrictions went, and they were more concerned about being shot at than sort of eradicating poppies. Not that eradicating poppies would do anything.
It's like trying to stop a tide coming in. I mean, there was success, a huge cost in Iran of stopping some of the trade through Iran. We just flowed somewhere else. It just went to Russia, to Kyrgyzstan, and various other countries. I mean, it's it's as though it's being sucked in. There's been no success.
It's why is it coming here? It's so illogical.
One of the things you have to remember is that this is a business to people. These drug cartels.
But we're an island. We're one of the most difficult places to get anything to. The fact that it would all be coming here is illogical.
It's not like that.
When
you look at the United Kingdom as an island with a 5,000 mile coastline, and you look at Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, who have staff to monitor those coastlines, you cut back, and the opportunities for it to come in and increase all the time. These people do this as a business. They have transport managers, development managers, and their own lawyers, their own accountants, and they run it as a business. And every time the police service or the customs have a success, and we go to a trial in the court, doesn't matter where it happens in the land, there will be a couple of people sitting in the court from that organisation listening very carefully to how you got caught this time, and they'll learn from that. And they are very good at it.
I still find it very difficult to accept that 90% of the stuff that's coming out of there comes here. And also because of the fact that why would you relocate to an area covered in troops and people running around shooting all the strangers?
It's not 90% of the stuff they got here. 90% of what we have comes from there. No, we, I suspect, only get a very small proportion of Afghanistan's output. The rest of it goes around Europe, States, etc. I also suspect most of the Golden Triangle either gets consumed within Asia or gets to the North American market for geographical reasons.
When Anne Widdicombe was the Minister for Drugs, I remember pointing out to I just arrived by plane in Cardiff, and going through customs there's a little notice saying, if you have anything to declare, will you ring this number? So I rang the number, and it was an answer phone. I just flown in from Amsterdam. I mean, it's as good as that.
I think we should also care about the people in Afghanistan and in South America as well. Just imagine how, what a transformation in Afghanistan if people were growing heroin and selling it legally to a legal market here. I know today's about cannabis, but the same thing about prohibition applied to heroin.
Afghanistan's also the principal producer of the best pretty much
But imagine farmers there, small-time farmers, able to legitimately earn money without fear of...
Well, why aren't we buying this all off them? I've never understood this. Why don't we just go to the farmers in Afghanistan and contract with them to buy their crop for the next 10 years?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And at the moment we've got a shortage of diamorphine in this country, so it's really licensing people in this country to grow opium poppies in, I can't remember, Dorset.
They don't grow very well here.
No, absolutely. I mean, my neighbour's got some in the back garden. The same neighbour who grew up here.
There's one, the government have boasted that they've ended heroin production in one province, the Balkh province in Afghanistan, and they have because all the farmers have gone with growing cannabis. and it's, you know, they're undisturbed by anything else except there was more money to be made inside cannabis.
Any more questions?
If I can ask Mr. Duffy to expand on what LEAP do, they very much fight on the point that the drug laws create this social divide, that it perpetuates harm. I'm just wondering if you could sort of just say something about what LEAP actually...
We work on the principle that, as I said earlier on, the drugs war is lost. When you look at the cost in the United States of America, since 1970 they have spent ever-increasing amounts of money. They spend about $69 billion a year just to keep the war against drugs. They have spent in total something approaching $17 trillion, which apparently is enough to buy a bank, just a small bank. They understand and they tell people that it's the reason teenagers in America smoke joints is that it's easier to get cannabis in America than it is to get alcohol. Alcohol is better regulated, better controlled, and harder to get. As was mentioned earlier on, the drugs laws in America are particularly racist. The very first drugs law in America was in 1914 when they brought out the Harrison Act, which made it illegal for Chinese people to possess opium. It didn't make it illegal for white men to possess opium. So if they raided a smoking den, they would arrest the Chinese people but not the white Americans. In America just now, you're 6 times more likely to go to prison for a drugs offence if you're black than if you're white. And all that's done is increase the prison population. Leap say that when you look at the amount of money that's spent, it's propagating the law, it's putting money in the pockets of the drug dealers. We should take that money and put it into education, we should put it into treatment, we should stop criminalising people, we should treat them as victims. If you take the example in this country of 30 years ago, almost everyone in this room 30 years ago would smoke cigarettes. Look at it today, it's maybe 2 or 3 people. How have we done that? Did we ban cigarettes? No, we didn't. We reduced them, we made them more expensive, we educated people, we spent money telling people what the effect was, what the harm was, and it reduced it, and it's reduced it quite substantially. It's not done away with it. We'll never do away with the drug problem, because there are people in this country, and all over the world, enjoy a wee bit of heroin. And from my point of view, if you want to sniff it, snort it, stick it in any orifice in your body that makes you happy, provided you know what it is, what the strength is, what the purity is, and what the effect will be, responsible as a whole team, then only go and fill your boots. Because we're not here to wrap you into a room. We're not here to get the children, we're not here to sell people on the routine, we're not here to make compulsory. This is about education, this is about taking the message to people at the bottom end of the scale, feeding it back up to the reaches the MPs. Then we'll get a change. That's what it's about.
I think a lot more of them should listen to you, Kevin.
I think I'll draw to a close then. Thank you very much to everybody for coming. Thank you particularly to Paul as our sponsoring MP. Thank you to the panel. Thank you very much.
It's been jerking all over the place. Every time I want to move it.
I've never used it or tried it. I just grabbed it.
Yeah. It was.
That's something that